Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Data Visualization Best Practices by Yellowfin. My name's John Ryan, I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Yellowfin, and as the title says, today's session is all about data visualization, which it's a hot topic, but it's also a key fundamental for helping you get the most out of your business intelligence and analytics investment. So today's webinar will be recorded. So if you do have any questions as we go through the webinar, there is a question panel for you to ask these, and we'll answer all of those questions at the end of the session. So what are we covering today? Well, we're going to start by covering why data visualization is important. We're then going to be covering the best practices for data visualization, including choosing the right chart type and how to optimize your charts to make them easier to understand and more attractive. And then we're going to finish with a quick demonstration showing you how you can put these best practices into action. So why visualize data? Well, we're in the information age and there is a sea of data out there. And data is exploding. I recently read that 90% of the world's data was only created in the last 2 years alone. So to keep pace with this, the world is spending billions of dollars every year on technology in the hope of producing meaningful and actionable information. And as you can see here by the chart, Gartner predict the global BI market to grow to $136 billion by 2020. And technology is certainly improving our ability to collect, store, and access data. It's now better than it ever has been. But we can't ignore the most important tool that makes information meaningful and useful, and that's our human brain. So data visualization is important because the human brain is not a computer and it has limitations. So I wish that I could upgrade my brain and maybe I'll give myself quad-core processing power so I can do multiple things at once and upgrade my short-term memory to remember more than 7 things. But the sad reality is our brains are simply not capable of processing, understanding, and remembering millions of rows of raw data without data visualization. So to highlight this, I'm sharing with you a very small amount of data and showing you sales by region for just 12 months. So this data has already been aggregated by month in a table to make it easier for you. And sometimes displaying data in tables can be very good. So some people love tables because they make it very easy for you to find exact numbers. And there's definitely a use case there. But without data visualization, it is a very slow process and it's very difficult to truly understand exactly what all of this data means and understand all of the relationships. So even with just this small amount of data, your brain can't instantly see and understand what it all means. But with a good data visualization, we can leverage what our mind is very good at, which is recognizing and understanding patterns. So what you see here is the exact same data that we showed you in the table before, but now with a lot less mental effort and less time, we can clearly see that Central is our best performing region and fastest growing region. We can see that the Southern region is actually declining. It was the best. We can see that the Eastern region performance is a little bit seasonal, and we can see the Western region's increasing, but it's our lowest performer and actually doing less than half of what Central does. So that's the power of data visualization. It's allowing us to think with our eyes. So we can use data visualization to help us achieve a number of things. So as we just discussed, it assists us humans in processing information, helping us make large or even small data sets more coherent and easier to absorb. But more importantly, data visualizations can help us make better decisions by helping us understand what's happening and helping us monitor if we're on the right track. And finally, you can also use data visualizations to influence others, and it can assist you in telling a compelling story. So if you do work for an organization where you have other people in the organization, it certainly helps if everybody's on the same page. And convincing, credible evidence is hard to ignore. So with data-driven storytelling, we can be more convincing without telling lies so that we can ethically influence decisions. Okay, so the IT industry, one thing it's very good at is making up vague buzzwords where people create their own definitions, such as cloud and big data. And data visualization didn't escape this. So when you do hear the term data visualization thrown about, know that there are really two different definitions that people could be referring to. So they could be referring to a data visualization that's explanatory, so basically just turning data into a chart. And the focus of today's best practice session is going to really all about helping you make your data visualizations more explanatory. Now, the other definition really refers to data visualization software that's all about allowing you to visually explore your data sets, which is more exploratory in nature and quite frequently referred to as data discovery. And in the demo part of today's session, we'll show you how that works there. So the key point here is if you do talk data viz with somebody, just make sure you are talking the same language. So now we've covered why visualizing data is important and the basics, let's get straight to the best practices. And the first best practice is to encode your charts with meaning. So your data needs to stand out and visually mean something. So as we said before, data visualization is about thinking with our eyes and making use of the different ways that we perceive things. And our minds happen to be very good at perceiving differences and contrasts because our eyes get drawn to familiar patterns. So below are some, not all, but some examples of different ways you can encode data into visuals with some types of quantitative meaning associated to it that the eye can process. And the key takeaway here is that some visual encoding methods happen to be better than others. So it's much easier for our brain to make more precise quantitative comparisons when using length and 2D position than if we encode our data using width, size, or intensity, which are often better used when comparing secondary metrics in a visualization. So if we look at this example here for length, our mind can easily see that one of the lines is shorter. In fact, it's about a quarter less than the others. However, if we do look at width, size, and intensity, we can definitely see that there's a difference there for each one. However, it's hard to tell exactly or precisely how much of a difference there really is by coding the data that way. So these are the building blocks of data visualization. I'll refer back to this when we go through the charts. But they're there to help our mind extract meaning using visual patterns. And as you do visually encode meaning into your data, a magical thing happens. Patterns emerge. So our brain can naturally extract meaning from these patterns. So patterns can help tell us if things are high or low, if they're flat or going up, going down, at what type of gradient, or if there are any fluctuations. And patterns can also help us identify clusters, gaps, and outliers too. So revealing patterns is what any good data visualization should do. So if your charts require you to stare at them for ages to decipher what they really mean, you should probably revisit how you're visually encoding your data into those charts. Okay, so next best practice is the big one. It's going to take up the bulk of the webinar, which is choosing the best chart type to explain your data. And the right chart type really depends on your question and what you really like to show. For example, line and bar charts are best used for showing comparisons. Stack charts or tree maps allow you to see compositions, meaning how individual components make up the whole. Histograms and box and whisker charts are great for showing how data is distributed. Scatter plots and heat grids highlight relationships. Big number charts and meters are great for KPIs. And if you want to show location data, then you're best to use a map. So we're going to go into each of these charts in detail in just a moment. But your chart should align with what it is you are really trying to show. So know your question and have the data available to answer that question. And if you have those things, there is a perfect chart type for you, which we're going to cover now. So I want to start with a very basic, but also very useful big number chart. Now, big number charts do one thing, which is give you an answer with a single metric. It's commonly an aggregation, such as sales this month, but it could be an average, a minimum, a maximum, or a median too. Now, big number charts are great for answering direct questions such as how much, because you really don't need a fancy chart to tell you that. And they're also fantastic for monitoring KPIs or key performance indicators too. So the secret behind making big number charts better is very simple. Just make them big and beautiful and make sure that that number really stands out and draws the eye in. Now, one trend I am thrilled to be seeing is big number charts being used in combination with other charts. So in this example here, we can see how our sales have changed over time, but we can also see the totals too, which gives us additional context. And me personally, I love combining big number charts with images, so it can make your report more enjoyable to look at. And it also starts you down the path of creating your own stunning infographics, which we know everyone loves. So remember here, the key secret, keep your numbers and your text big and really make it stand out. Okay, next we're going to cover different types of line charts. So line charts are one of the most frequently used chart types, and they're the best chart type to use when you're displaying metric over a period of time. So to make a line chart, you should have your data that is metric and preferably data that's time stamped or date stamped. And there are many variations of different line charts that you can use, including step charts. So when would you use one versus the other? So line charts, you see here, are better to highlight trends. So they're particularly good at looking at aggregated data over longer periods of time, such as weeks, months, quarters, or years. Whereas step charts can work better when you're looking at more granular time data. So in particular, when there might be long time intervals where there's no change, and then suddenly there's a big change that's suddenly occurred. Because it better highlights that sudden increase that might be hidden if that difference was there from a gradient. Now, step charts are also a better choice if your data happens to be missing some dates, which can happen if your data or your query is structured by transactions. And in the example that you see here does a good job of highlighting exactly why that's better. So you can see it's much more accurate and tells a clearer story on the step chart there. So area charts are another variation on a line chart. So it's basically the same thing, but an area chart shades the area underneath the line chart. And if all you are visualizing is just a single metric, then both line charts and area charts can work very well. However, as you add additional metrics or dimensions to your visualization, then your decision to go with an area or a line chart depends on if you're trying to highlight a composition, like you see here, or do a comparison. So stacked area charts are best when you want to see how the total, what makes up the total composed of the sum of a set of categories. So showing you a multiple to whole relationship. Whereas if you want to compare those different categories against each other, then you should be using a multi-line chart. So with a multi-line chart, all of your lines actually start at the same point on the y-axis, which is 0, making it much easier for your eye to do direct comparisons. So if all you're comparing is your different categories over time, then you should be using a multi-line chart and not a stacked area chart. So bar and column charts are another of the most used chart types, perhaps the most used. And bar and column charts are best for comparing data across different categories. So to make a bar or a column chart, you need at least one metric and at least one dimension. And bars and columns are very similar. They're basically just the same thing, reorientated. So when would you choose one versus another? And the answer is that it depends on the number of categories that you have. So column charts are fantastic for comparing different categories by a metric. So if we look at this specific example here, we can clearly see and compare our different salespeople against each other. However, as the number of the categories increases or the size of your data labels increase, the effectiveness of column charts decrease. So in this example here, we've doubled our number of categories, and I've also included a surname. And now it's actually become quite difficult to read who these different salespeople at the bottom are, and might need our tooltip to actually tell us what they actually are because the labels have been cut off on the horizontal axis. So one way to make these labels more visible is that you can rotate the horizontal text for that axis. And this sort of solves our problem. It looks okay, but to read this, you actually do need to tilt your head sideways to read it properly. And we certainly don't want people hurting their necks or looking strange at work. So this is really where bar charts are fantastic because they make your charts easier to read. And as a general rule of thumb, we recommend you use a column chart for less than 10 categories and use a bar chart when there are more than 10 categories. But ultimately, you need to just look at the chart and see if the labels are fit and are readable. Now, one final point here is sometimes you do have too many categories even for a bar chart. So in this scenario, you might want to consider using a rank like a top 10 or a top 20 so you can see the data properly. And just like line charts, there are some variations on bar and column charts too. So you can do a proportional bar chart, which is great for showing how close values in different categories come to the highest category. So they're very good at assisting us to see proportions. And just like line charts, you can also add additional dimensions to your bar and column charts as well. So just like in line charts, a stacked column chart is best for seeing how the total is made up of those different categories, whereas clustered column charts are better for comparing the different categories against each other. Some more variations on this. A variation on a cluster chart is a bullet chart, and both of these actually work best when you only have two categories. So a cluster is really good for comparing categories such as this year versus last year, whereas a bullet chart is really good when you want to see metrics over time, when a metric overtakes another, like with a KPI. So when using a bullet chart, you do want to make sure that you get the order of your bars correctly, otherwise some of the data might be hidden. And also be careful using bullet charts that your data isn't actually too similar, because if it is, it can become a bit unreadable. Now, the power of clustered charts does decrease as the number of your categories increases. So as you can see here, we've only got 4 categories, and it's already become significantly harder to quickly understand exactly what's going on with this chart. So our minds find it more difficult to compare because the colors are all over the place. They're not sure what they're actually meant to compare against. So when your chart does start to look like a double rainbow, the answer is to use a trellis chart instead. So trellis charts are very similar to a clustered bar chart, but the categories are grouped in a more intuitive way on the axis rather than broken down by color. So below are 2 different trellis charts using the same data. The one on the left is best for comparing region by revenue, and the one on the right is better for comparing revenue type by region. And in these examples, our mind's not confused trying to connect all of the different colors together. Now, one note here is that trellis charts are also fantastic for working with line charts too. So when you do want to add in those additional dimensions, it's a great option for you to choose. Okay, so the next chart type that we're going to explore is the pie chart, another very popular chart, but probably the most frequently misused chart type. So to make a pie chart, you need a metric and a dimension. And really when you should use a pie chart, most experts in data visualization will actually tell you never, you should only eat pies for dessert. And they do have some pretty good logic to support this. So it takes a lot more mental effort to decipher a pie chart. So you often have to look back and forth between the colors and the legends. And pie charts are also particularly bad if you have categories of similar sizes. So for example, what's actually bigger here between this purple slice, which is South America, and this blue slice, which is Central America. So it's very hard to tell which one might be bigger. And pie charts are also bad as your number of categories increases. It becomes a lot harder for you to really understand what this chart's telling us. And all of this comes back to that best practice number one, which is how the data is encoded. So while many people think that pie charts are best for showing things like percentages or how things are broken down, the visual coding is actually less precise than if you were to use something like a basic column chart like we have here on the right, which is almost always easier to compare. So in this example here, we're using the exact same data as we are in the pie chart, but with less effort, we can tell, so our North America, which is this green slice, we can see that's just under 40%. We can also clearly see that Central Asia and South America, Central Asia is actually slightly bigger, which is something that was very hard to tell here. So rather than just going with the pie charts, which is what so many people do take a think about what you're really trying to display, because bar charts can be very good for showing percentage as well. Now, the only really time that pie charts are more effective than bar charts is when you're comparing just two categories. So in this example here, it's actually faster for me to see which slice is bigger against two categories compared to the bars that's there. So it's really the only time where it really works. And also, just quickly, a variation, another option for a pie chart is a ring chart. One of the things I do like about ring charts is they're a lot cleaner, there's more white space, but also they can be a very nice complement to a big number chart as well. So the next chart type that we'll cover is our different maps. Now, I love seeing data on maps because unlike any of the other chart types, maps can show you where things are. And not only that, they can also show you where things are not too, which can be very useful for doing things such as identifying opportunities like where my next store is going to be. Now, the easiest way to draw your data on a map is to have your data geocoded. So if you are lucky enough to have a tool like Yellowfin, then all you need to do is connect your data to our geopacks, and it will automatically recognize your location data such as country, state, postcode, and zip, which makes seeing your data on a map a lot easier. Otherwise, you can also draw data on maps if you have a GIS polygon, which will draw the shapes of your areas, such as your countries and your states, like you see here. And in addition to that, you can also draw data on a map if you have a GIS point, which will draw a specific coordinate using latitude and longitude. And I just added those in there, and those little dots that you can see there are GIS points. So there are a variety of different map types you can use. The first I'll show you here is thematic maps or GIS maps, which use polygons to visualize data and are great for displaying data within an area or boundaries. The metric here is communicated using color, and thematic maps are best used when you have lots of categories. For example, if you want to show the population of every state in America. Now, bubble maps are quite similar to heat maps, but instead of using color, they use size to communicate the metric. Now, because categories on maps do have different shapes, so one state might be a different size or shape to another, and it might end up looking small, bubble maps can be very effective in allowing you to better compare the different metrics versus each other. They're much more comparable and easier for the eye to see. However, you do need to be careful using bubble maps when you do have too many categories or categories that are too close to one another where they can actually block or obscure each other's view. And look, one of the nice things about using bubble maps as well is you can give you flexibility around adding secondary metrics. So in this example here, we've also added color as well as size, so we can actually look at two different metrics such as revenue and profit at the same time. So another map type is a thematic map, which shows the concentration of occurrences of interest in the same location. And as we showed you in that first example, if I just go back here, you can also layer bubbles on top of thematic maps as well in Yellowfin using layers. Okay, the next chart type we're going to look at is the histogram. And the histogram shows you the underlying frequency distribution shape of a set of continuous data. So in other words, it shows you the number of records and how those records are distributed, which helps you see outliers as well as how your data is actually skewed. Now, histograms usually separate data into bins. Like a group of data such as an age bracket or grades or scores, which makes it easier for us to understand how that data is then distributed. So it's important to understand the difference here between a histogram and a bar chart because they do look very similar. But bar charts are looking at totals or aggregates by different categories, whereas a histogram counts the number of records in a specific bin class to help you understand the data distribution. So the next is the box and whisker plot, definitely named after what it looks like. And these are very good for showing the distributions of your actual data sets. So not the count, but what's actually in the data. So the name refers to the two parts of the plot. So you have the box, which contains the median of the data, which is the middle value, as well as your first and third quartiles, which essentially means 25% greater and 25% less than the median. And then you have the whiskers here, which typically represent the minimum and maximum data points in the data. So you can see how the data is actually distributed. So you would use a box and whisker when you want to see the distribution of a category. And they're particularly good for seeing this across multiple categories like you see in this example. So the next chart type we'll look at is the scatter plot. Scatter plots are great for showing relationships, so how one variable is affected by another variable. So to build them, you do require at least two metrics. So scatter plots are great for uncovering correlations, positive, negative, or perhaps there's no correlation, that tells us something. And it's also very good for identifying clusters and outliers as well. Now, one of the things I do love about Yellowfin is that we make it very easy to add trend lines to your charts, including your scatter plots. And this makes it much easier for non-technical users to be able to actually look at the correlations, and actually Yellowfin can tell you what the correlation means. In this case, there's a strong positive linear correlation. So that makes it a lot easier for non-technical users. In addition, you can add a metric to the size of your scatter plot. And when you do, you get a bubble chart. So now with a bubble chart, you can actually look at the relationship of three metrics. And if you did want to take this a step further, you could add an additional metric here to color as well, or do what I've actually done in this particular example, which is add a dimension to color, which now breaks up the different dots by our categories. So the next chart type is the heat map, which is also great for highlighting relationships, but in this case, relationships between two dimensions rather than two metrics, like with a scatter. So it does require two dimensions, one for each axis, with the metric highlighting the color in the middle. So in this example here, the heat grid quickly highlights which demographics make the most money by region. Now, if you add an additional metric to a heat grid under size, then you can turn your chart into a circle chart. So now we can actually see the relationship between two dimensions and two metrics. So in this example here, what we can see is that in Asia, our sales performance is okay, but our best performing sales areas are actually not profitable. Whereas Sub-Saharan Africa, sales are very low, but it's our most profitable area. Now, another variation on a heat map is a weak density chart, which is slightly different because now your X and Y axis are measures of time. And these are very good for analyzing metrics such as sales by day, by hour. And to make weak density work, you preferably need to have your data time stamped or broken down into those day and hour dimensions. So this is a best practice chart for seeing when things happen during the week. And it can help us make decisions on things such as when resources are really needed. So next chart type is the tree map, which I always thought had a funny name because it doesn't look anything like a tree or a map. But they are very good for visualizing hierarchical data and seeing how the total is made up of the sum of its parts. So these are particularly good when you have hundreds or thousands of categories, perhaps like a supermarket, because the bigger categories really stand out in the top left, with the smaller categories going to the bottom right. And TreeMaps make it easy for you to group your categories by other dimensions too. So you can add additional dimension or a metric to a tree map using color as well. Next, we're going to take a look at meters, which are good for giving people a quick glance on how they're performing versus a KPI. Now, you can make a meter with a metric and a conditional formatting turned on. And we've probably all used meters before outside of a BI tool, such as when you're driving your car. And what we do find is it's probably sales guys are the ones that love meters the most. So that combination of a target and maybe the thought of going full throttle like you are in a car seems appealing or motivating to them. And there are lots of variations that you can have with meters, such as dials or thermometers, but all are good for measuring either KPIs or measuring rate of change. Okay, so finally, we're just going to quickly cover some of the special purpose chart types that you could use. So funnels are great for seeing categories ordered by stage, so particularly good for looking at, say, a sales funnel. There's radar charts, or also known as spider charts. So these are great for displaying multivariate data with your categories along 3 or more axes, where your measure or your metric is scaling up the axis. And you'd use radar charts. They're pretty good if you're looking at things such as quality improvement, because they're very good at highlighting both strengths and weaknesses. And look, finally, just going to give you a few examples of some infographic style charts. So Yellowfin's very strong at making infographics. We support a variety of different ones. The one that you see here is a proportional infographic, which is basically the same as looking at a stacked bar, but it's using an image to give you additional context. Now, another variation on this same theme is a comparative infographic, which makes the size of your category a bigger contextual image. So use that same image, but the image gets bigger. And finally, there's raster map infographics. So these are actually just using a map. So this is a map chart type with a custom map on it. And what it does is it highlights, so the hotter points are broken down. So in this example, we're looking at broken bones from skiing accidents on the human body at a ski resort. And this type of chart allows us to see where those breaks are, because it's a map, it's showing where. So when it does come to using infographics, you do want to use the chart type that's going to best support the story that you're trying to tell. And if the infographic is not helping you tell that story better, then you probably don't need it. It's just style over substance. Now, speaking of style over substance, let's just quickly talk about using 3D charts. So 3D charts are not best practice. Most BI tools do support 3D charts for some reason. Yellowfin certainly does, but we do rarely see them used. We don't recommend that you use them, and that's because 3D distorts the measurement. And in my opinion, they also, I don't think they look as nice as a nice, clean 2D chart. So, sometimes people think, oh, will look good in marketing brochure. No, 2D chart, I think personally looks better. So we've just covered how to choose the right chart type for your needs. So we didn't cover every chart type today. There are a number more I have left out, but we have covered the most used ones. And what you see here is a summary of most of the charts we've covered. And you should really think about this when really working out what it is the question you're trying to ask. So this chart here is available in the Yellowfin Wiki under our report builder section if you do want to look at it in detail. But there is a perfect chart type for your data and your question. And one of the things I love about Yellowfin is that as you explore your data, Yellowfin's auto charts will automatically draw the best practice chart for you depending on the data that you're asking it to draw. And look, just one final note here as we wrap up this point of the best practice. There is sort of a secret best practice that you might want to take into account here, which is what your boss wants is probably best practice too, even though it might not be best practice, at least for your career. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the second best practice, which is choosing the right chart type to answer the question that you're asking. Now that we've chosen our chart type, the next best practice is formatting, where we tackle the little things that make your chart easier to understand and aesthetically pleasing. So starting with color. Color was mentioned in best practice number 1 as one of the different ways you could encode your data with meaning. And color can be used differently depending on what you want to show in your data. So if you wanted to use color as a metric, then there are 2 different ways you can do this. The first is sequential, where you have one color that's ordered from highest to lowest. Another option is diverging, where you have 2 different color schemes, and then you have a critical midpoint, such as it could be a budget, or it could be a population average, or perhaps it's 0, which is good for things such as weather. You can also use color by dimension too to highlight different categories. When you do this, each category will have a unique color to suit it. And these are very good for making those different categories really stand out on your charts. Okay, so grid lines are another formatting option that you should consider, and these are very good for helping you communicate thresholds. So your mind is actually drawing imaginary thresholds anyway if you don't have grid lines. So when you're trying to compare these different charts to yourself, your eye is sort of drawing that line for it naturally. So why not make it easier for your mind by actually putting it on the chart there, so you can see where we have the different thresholds drop. So we've got 3 of the categories falling between 10,000 and 7,500. So you do need to be careful using grid lines though. If you use too many, it actually becomes harder to read your charts because you can't actually follow that line across. There's too many to keep track where it started. So make sure you understand your key thresholds and try to stick to those. And there are variations that you can have with grid lines as well. So you could have shaded bands where every second group of grid lines is shaded to make that stand out as well. Labels are another formatting option, and labels are great because they allow you to clearly see the exact number of a specific category. So they're supporting the visual representation. Now, if you don't have labels, certainly you can look at the axis, or you can use the tooltips if you're in a BI tool. And this is certainly great for live data because the label appears when you hover over the top. But labels are particularly important if you are going to turn your charts into anything static, so perhaps something that is printed. We certainly recommend you consider labels in that situation. Legends are another formatting option and are commonly used when in charts where color is used as either a dimension or used as a metric. And if you aren't using color to encode meaning into your charts, then you probably don't need a legend, and you can probably remove that there. And also we do have a warning that to try to avoid having legends with too many categories in it. In an extreme example, your chart's going to look all legend and less chart. And just finally for this point, people like consistency. So our brain is designed to quickly notice patterns and outliers. And your brain is also quick to notice if your data visualizations have any inconsistencies with the look and feel as well. It's an added distraction and you don't want that. So when you do use different fonts in your charts or on your dashboards, it's a distraction and people notice. And when you do use different colors or maybe the same color for different types of metrics, again, people notice, and it makes it a lot harder for people to understand what's actually going on in your data set. So we strongly recommend that you keep it consistent for quick and accurate perception. Any changes confuse people, and it might actually cause them to misrepresent your data, which is something you also don't want. So make it as easy as possible for people to understand your charts, and do go to the effort to ensure it's consistent. And one of the great things about Yellowfin is that you can enforce consistency there by taking advantage of Yellowfin's metadata layer. as well as our ORG-ref codes to ensure that that look and feel is consistent. Okay, so we've encoded meaning into our charts, we've chosen the best chart type, and we've correctly formatted our charts. The next step is adding clarity and giving your charts even more meaning. And starting with titles and descriptions, which are very important. The reason why they're important is that they frame the story and the purpose of what your charts mean. So in other words, they tell us what we're looking at. Now, if your charts are designed for monitoring, then it's best to name the title and give it a description about what the chart represents. So in this example on the left, sales by quarter. And if the data moves, it's still telling us exactly what the chart represents. Now, if you do want to tell a story that is a little more explanatory though, why not put that story in your title and actually put that critical insight that you want to get across and make that more obvious. So in the example on the right, iPhone driving growth, that's a really good example of how to use data to support your story. Now, sorting is another area that helps add clarity to your charts. It's always a good idea to appropriately sort your charts. And this is especially relevant when using bar and column charts because sorting can help you tell the story a bit better. So if you sort by alphabetical, this works really well when you want to help people find the category that they're looking at. So some examples where this is really useful if you're comparing different countries against each other, or maybe comparing different people's names, performance of different salespeople, or might be an example where you're looking for your favorite sports team. And because it's alphabetical, you know exactly where to look for that, and you can find what it is that you're looking for. So that was alphabetical. Another way to display the sorting is ascending. So you would use ascending when you want the data to tell a story that has a flow. So for example, from earliest to latest. So this works really well with things such as maybe product iterations or growth. And it can also work really well if you're using months or years in a bar chart too. But probably the most common is sorting by descending, which is best if you want to get straight to the point of what is the biggest. And descending works best because the biggest column actually sits closest to the y-axis, so we're able to quickly see what this comparison actually means. And our mind works by comparing crosswords, so we're able to actually allows us to actually make these comparisons a lot faster mentally. So best practice number 5 is to highlight what's important. So when you're presenting these charts to an audience, you need to know your story and direct their attention to what is important. And there are a number of different ways that you can do this. So the first is to use conditional formatting, where the color on your data depends on if it is below or above a certain threshold, and the color will actually change. Reference lines are another way of highlighting what's important. So a reference line is a threshold based on a metric, and it's a very good way of seeing if you're on target for a goal. Another option is to use annotations. So with annotations, you can attach descriptions and comments to your charts. And when you do attach an annotation, that annotation stays with the data that it's annotated to. So if my time range does actually move, the annotation will move with it. Now, annotations are great for sharing knowledge throughout an organization. So in this example here, if there was an increase that we investigated to work out why that increase is there, now everyone has access to that knowledge, so we don't have to reinvestigate it. Trends are another great way to highlight what's important. One of the reasons why we look at charts in the first place is to try to understand and get an idea of what trends are happening. So why not make that even easier to understand by just plotting that on the chart for people? And another way to do that as well is actually to project a forecast where the data is actually predicting or forecasting what's going to happen next. And again, Yellowfin's very good at these. Okay, so best practice number 6, make it interactive. And this is super important for allowing people to explore data using visuals, because it helps people find the insights that they're actually looking for. And let's face it, data is more fun and therefore easy to learn when it's actually more interactive for us to play with. Now, if you are looking at BI tools that really excel in interactivity, then certainly Yellowfin should be one of the first BI tools you look at. We have probably the most types of interactions of any BI tools out there on the market. So some of these interactivity options include being able to very easily change your unit selections on charts. So here we might be looking at month, but we could change that to quarter or year. It's very easy to change your time periods using our time sliders. So you don't need really much technical knowledge to work out how to use those. Filters. So filters are another very popular interaction type. Make it very easy for people to include or exclude data. So Yellowfin filters are highly configurable. You can filter via brushing. You can also filter using filters that might appear above or below on a dashboard. So in this case, if let's just say I wanted to filter by adventure and sport, and I apply that, then it's going to include adventure and sport and exclude the other areas there. Panning and zooming is another form of interaction, and this is particularly popular with maps. So we can pan sideways or we can zoom into our data, and allows people to rescale and go from high level to low level. Drill throughs are another option. So Yellowfin supports all of the types of drills, including drill throughs. And drill throughs work by clicking on a specific piece of data. So if I click on Europe here, which then opens another report filtered by specifically the data that I originally clicked on. So here are your countries in Europe. And this is very good for going from high level to low level data and being able to ask specific questions, and particularly around strategic type questions. Drill downs are another form of drill, and these are really good when you want to drill down using predefined hierarchies, such as region to country to state. So if I wanted to drill down to our beer types, we can just click on that and we can now see the breakdown by our different beer types. Drill anywhere is very similar to drill down, but a bit more flexible. So with drill anywhere, you're able to click on a piece of data and really drill down by any of your types. So in this case, we might want to drill from, so let's look at Europe and look at our different booking methods for Europe. So we can see that's made up of email, phone, and web forms. So maybe I'll pick email and I'll look at how that's gone by year. So I've now drilled specifically from Europe, specifically for booking methods, specifically for Europe. And I can continue to click and investigate further. So drill anywhere is really, really nice if you really want to slice and dice the data. And there's also series selection, which lets you change your series or your metric. So here we do get a preview, but we're able to change from invoice to cost or to profit. And the data changes there for us, changing our metric. So it's a very powerful way for exploring more data faster. Okay, finally, best practice number 7, our last best practice for today, is share, because data is more valuable when shared. So it's great if you go to the effort to create a stunning data visualization, but that data viz has no power outside of you unless it gets shared. So don't keep it to yourself, use it to influence people and turn those insights into action. And Yellowfin makes sharing data easy in a variety of different ways. The most common is probably sharing via dashboards. So dashboards are fantastic because you can bundle multiple data visualizations onto a single page rather than having to have somebody open, say, 4 different reports individually. And if you have found today's session educational, then I do strongly recommend you go to YouTube and check out Yellowfin's webinar last year on dashboard best practices, because we did an entire webinar just on that one topic. So broadcasting is another great way to share and get the data out there. So not everybody logs on to a BI tool. And a broadcast can be set up in a couple of different ways. So the first is where it's sent out reports periodically, such as send these people a report every Monday morning at 9 a.m. before a meeting. And another way you can set up a broadcast as well is to set it up to send an alert if the data goes above or below a certain threshold. So in that example, the data is telling you when to take action. So it's getting those insights into people in a very timely way. Embedding reports into other applications or web pages is another great way of getting your insights into more hands. Now, not everybody logs into a BI tool. So if you really want to get the data into people's hands, sometimes you do have to go to them. And Yellowfin is very strong at embedding into web pages, but in particular, embedding into other applications. People that use the tool that they're familiar with can get these insights. Data in presentations is obviously a big one. So if you do want to do that, we do recommend you consider using Yellowfin Storyboard, which is what we've been using for this entire presentation. So all of these charts that I've been showing you of the best practice were actually live charts that we're running on the Yellowfin server. And Storyboard's fantastic. We certainly think it's much better than taking a static PNG screenshot of Excel, then pasting that static screenshot into PowerPoint. Why not use live data where you can continue to ask questions and do additional interactions on? Last couple, so timelines. Timelines are very good for giving you a personalized view of what's important to you. So it's a lot like Facebook. It's social for BI. And it does keep people up to date by feeding them the latest insights specifically relevant to them. And finally, you do need to make sure these insights are available on any platform and on any device. And Yellowfin certainly helps you do all of these things, which goes to the effect of making your data more shareable and therefore more valuable. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our data visualization best practices. So next, I'm just going to give you a quick demonstration of how Yellowfin helps you do more exploratory data visualization or data discovery to help you find insights in your data. So I'm just going to hop into another instance of Yellowfin where we're in our chart builder. And just in the interest of time, I've already connected to our data here and I'm in the chart building phase. And really, this is a step where we can visually explore what's in our data set. I'm going to do that by showing you how Yellowfin auto charts help you choose the right chart type for your data. So over on the left here, we have our data, which is broken into our dimensions and our metrics. And we're able to visualize this data simply by moving either a dimension or metric onto either the horizontal axis or the vertical axis, the color, or the size. So if I take my sales metric and put that on the horizontal axis, Yellowfin is going to show me a big number chart. So here I'm asking a very simple question: what's our total sales? And Yellowfin is telling me how much using that big number chart. So now we know how much our total sales is. The next question I might want to explore is how is this broken down by different product types? So to see that, we just need to take our product type dimension and move that to the vertical axis. And Yellowfin is going to now tell me how my sales is made up of different alcohol sales. So let me just sort this. So I'm just going to click on the dimension and let's just sort this by our metric. And I'll just quickly now sort this. So this is going to actually give it to us ascending. Let's just look at this by descending. And now I can clearly see that ale is my biggest seller. In fact, my top 3 sellers look like they're beers, and the bottom 3 sellers look like they're wines. So look, we can investigate this further, see if this is true. If we take our product family and put that under color, yes, we can now see that clearly the top 3 are all beers, the bottom 3 are wines. So we've created one chart so far. Let's just create another. So we're just going to press plus here to create our next data visualization. And now let's look at how Yellowfin works using sales over time. So to do that, I'm going to take my sales in the vertical and my date under the horizontal axis. And Yellowfin instantly recognizes that what I want to see is sales over time. So it's giving me a line chart. Now, right now it's showing me sales by day because that's the level of granularity I actually have. But we can change that granularity, so it's probably more useful if we look at this by month. And now we can actually see, clearly see, that our sales look like they're increasing, and our last month was our best month ever. Now, one of the things I do love about Yellowfin is that it's very easy to add trends and project forecasts. So to do that, it's very easy. You just need to click on your metric, press add function. I could choose a trend. So in this example, let's just choose a forecast. And now we can see that our sales are also forecast to increase as well. In fact, we can even click on those and it tells us it's forecast to go up. Let's just continue to ask a few more questions, explore this data a little bit more. Let's have a look at how this is broken down by product family, so our beers and wines. So if I take product family and drag that to color, Yellowfin is going to split that line into two different lines. So I can actually compare our sales of beers versus our sales of wine. And obviously, there's a lot more sales there of beers that are going. And finally, just one more question for today's session, which is let's look at this by product type and build a trellis chart. So if I take my product chart and I actually just put that above our existing horizontal axis, which is date, Yellowfin is going to create a trellis chart by our different product types. Once that's built, we're able to actually see how the breakdown is. And in fact, because we still have product family and color, it's also broken those by family there. And what this tells us is, our ales and our ciders are growing rapidly, as is our red wines, which is probably growing the fastest, whereas our lagers, our white wines, and our sparkling wines are not performing so well. And in fact, just with the sparkling wines, that's actually forecast to go down. So it's very, very clear as we ask these questions. Yellowfin is giving us an answer using a best practice chart that really tells us something that's insightful. Now, Yellowfin does come with lots of different formatting options. So to look at those, you just need to click on anything at the top. You're able to format the legend or the axis, the background elements, all of those things. And if you don't want to use Yellowfin's auto chart, and if you already know the specific chart type that you want to make, then Yellowfin does have over 50 different chart types that you can choose from. So you can take a look at those, just click on these chart types, and then it will tell you exactly the data you need to make those charts. So that's a quick look at some of Yellowfin's data visualization capabilities that make it very easy to discover and explore what's in your data sets. Okay, so look, here's just a quick summary of those 7 best practices that we talked through. So the first is to encode your charts with meaning. The second was choosing the right chart type. Third was formatting to get the styling right to make your charts look good. Number 4 was adding clarity to give it even more meaning. Number 5, highlighting what's important to help you tell your story. Number 6, make it interactive. And most importantly, number 7, make sure these data visualizations get shared so you can get the most value out of them. So if you do want to learn more about data visualization, then I can recommend the following books, all written by industry legends, including Edward Tufte and Stephen Few. And also, please go to our YouTube channel and check out our best practice webinars there, where we cover other BI topics such as best practices for dashboards, which we think is a must-watch, data-driven storytelling best practices, embedded BI, governed data discovery best practices, and also cloud BI best practices as well. So we're right on the hour. That brings us to the end of today's presentation. So we do hope that you have found this both enjoyable and educational. We certainly hope that can help you make the most value out of your BI investment that you have done. I certainly hope that it can help you trigger ideas to have more interesting insights in your data and ask more questions with your BI tool to give it more value. And hopefully this can just be part of your journey to becoming a real data expert. So we're going to open up now for questions. So I'd just like to finish by thanking everybody for their time. It's so wonderful to have such amazing customers and partners that really do support us. So thank you very much. If you do have any feedback, let us know. Thanks everybody.